Hi, this is Dr. Ranj, and I'm really great to be joined today by Nin. We will be discussing autoimmune disease. Nin recently been diagnosed with MS and is a member of the Asian MS Society. And it's really great to have you here, Nin.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it'd be really good to talk about what I want to talk about was kind of autoimmune disease and how nutrition impacts in autoimmune disease. And so, yeah, it'd be great to sort of have a discussion based around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, brilliant. So obviously as we said, you've recently been diagnosed with MS and obviously undergoing sort of treatments and things for that. Um, Wanted to know a little bit about where kind of nutrition kind of fit into all of that, and in those kind of early sort of hospital appointments and discussions with specialists and things, how much of an emphasis was there put on sort of diet and lifestyle in all of that?
It wasn't really. It was really difficult because I got diagnosed on a Friday. So it was March the 4th, 2022, I got diagnosed. So I've only just come through almost a year and a bit. And I got diagnosed on the Friday and the doctor came over. My husband couldn't be there, so it was a FaceTime with him. And it was, by the way, you've got MS, but you can be discharged. You can leave in an hour. And I was like, oh, okay then. And I think the emphasis at that time was the fact that I was able to leave because I'd been in hospital for a week. So I was just focusing on being able to leave hospital. And then it wasn't until, and that's all they said, they didn't give me any guidance, nothing. It was like, here, you've got MS, off you go now. And then it was that evening when we managed to fully process it. And it was my husband. He then was like, right, I'm going to take control of this. We're going to figure out what it is, how it's going to affect you, and what we can do to control it. And then that Saturday, only because of his research, that Saturday, him and my dad went to the local supermarket and did a massive food shop because he'd done all the research the night before as to potentially what foods could cause inflammation, what foods to avoid. And then it was really bizarre. Like, my parents went back to Yorkshire with bagfuls of food because we had to completely change everything in our house, because actually, on the whole, I became dairy-free, gluten-free. I was very much focused on anti-inflammatory foods. So the emphasis from the hospital, they didn't actually give me anything on that day. It was only because my husband then did the research himself to take control that we managed to then figure out what sort of diet I wanted to proceed with. But then my first neurologist appointment with at the hospital, she then left with parting words of, well, you can eat everything, but we suggest that you go to focus on omega-3, you look at fatty fish, you have lots of nuts and vegetables. And she kind of just reeled off staple food items. But in terms of a diet plan and a meal plan, that was very much on our terms, and we created one ourselves.
Yeah, well, often, yeah, unfortunately, it's what you describe is not uncommon in
Yeah.
And so obviously, it's first of all, obviously, just being left with that diagnosis is absolutely sort of devastating, and not given any information about it is difficult in itself. But amazing, from the sounds of the support you've obviously got at home, and the way kind of the whole family come together to support you with the diet.
Yeah,
pretty brilliant.
I think it was like it's the shock of something, isn't it? Like, the shock of something just gears you up to a whole other level, and just switch something off on in the family, and they were like, right, okay, we need to then be proactive. And it was all it was a reactive sort of response rather than a proactive or preventative. It was more like, this is what it is now, this is what we need to do to make sure it doesn't get any worse.
Sure.
And that's the sort of approach that they took, and I'd like to think it's made a huge impact on my recovery.
Good. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. And it's a bit of a shame also that the sort of the nutrition element, like you mentioned there, when you saw the neurologist, was almost like a passing comment at the end of your consultation. you know, so were there ever any follow-ups where there's been anyone's come back with any more advice?
No, it's really hard. Like I have regular appointments with my MS nurse. So I was diagnosed a nurse as soon as I was I was assigned a nurse as soon as I was diagnosed, and my appointments with her, she's very much like, are you still eating these staple food items? I'm like, yeah. She's like, brilliant, great. And that's it. And nothing else is really delved in anymore. So no one's actually told me how diet can affect an autoimmune disease. And that was going to be my sort of question to you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. It's a brilliant question. And I think it's one of those, and you probably, feel it yourself until you actually understand, why the two are linked. You don't always understand, and then you don't always put in enough emphasis towards actually making those changes. And also those changes, then also if you don't understand why you're doing them, they're not sustainable.
No.
Because you might start it and you think, actually, why am I doing this? But so that question is a really, really important question. So I'll try not to go into too much detail, but the important thing about as we can all clearly see that the sort of the prevalence of autoimmune diseases is going up rapidly. And then we look at what's the link between the prevalence of autoimmune disease going up, and the biggest thing is it's the Western diet. And you can kind of draw this correlation, because you can look at areas in the world where there isn't where people don't have this Western diet. So we talk about sort of the blue zones across the world where they have mainly plant-based diets, Mediterranean style diet, all of those sorts of things, and their prevalence of autoimmune disease is very, very low. And then you're looking at, okay, well, why is that happening? And the underlying reason is because the foods that we're eating in the Western diet are highly inflammatory foods. Okay, so your refined carbohydrates, your saturated and trans fats, your the processed foods, these are all highly inflammatory foods. And what that means is that what's happening on the inside, and it actually goes back to when your parents and always things you always used to say, like you are what you eat. It makes a lot of sense actually, because it has such an impact on what happens to us. So these inflammatory foods, they cause obviously inflammation in the guts. The first place they're going to go is the gut, and they cause inflammation. And what that means is that it affects the gut bacteria, and the gut bacteria is what processes our food. So we get an increase in the bad bacteria. The good bacteria that we actually want get suppressed, and so these bad bacteria then are producing toxins, sort of breakdown products of the foods that we've eaten, and these are causing inflammation in the gut that then damages the gut lining. And now all of these particles and molecules that shouldn't be getting into the bloodstream are now getting into the rest of the system. And then that's what triggers the immune system, because the immune system is there to fight things that aren't supposed to be there. So these toxins and sort of breakdown products and proteins and things like that are getting into the system. The immune system's looking at it and saying, you're not supposed to be here, so I'm going to attack you and develop an antibody to you. And that's where this term kind of molecular mimicry comes in. So molecular mimicry means that these antibodies that they're producing against these kind of proteins and things, they kind of mimic sort of tissues of the body. And what happens then is that because we now produced antibodies against these proteins, but it's similar to receptors on other tissues of the body, these antibodies now start to attack our own body. And that's where kind of the autoimmune element comes from.
It's hard actually, because when you get diagnosed with something, you focus so much on the word, you don't focus on how it's actually affecting your body. And I never knew I thought I was relatively healthy before I got diagnosed, because we were very conscious of on what we ate, how much we ate of it. You know, we did focus on our fruits and vegetables, but actually we weren't eating the right healthy foods. And I think and eating the right fats.
Mm.
And I think it's all about the hidden things. So using, you know, we changed, rather than sunflower oil, we use extra virgin olive oil.
Sure.
You know, those little things, those little tweaks that we had to make to our lifestyle just to make the biggest difference. And eating the right nuts. You know, it's not about your salted peanuts. You know, it's about your walnuts. It's you know, it's about your almonds. It's about, you know, all those really good nutritional nuts, rather than your dry roasted peanuts and stuff that you might have on a Saturday night or something.
Fortunately, you know, kind of marketing and all of that it pushes us to eat, you know, sort of the wrong foods, and it's only when we really need to look into, well, what are we actually eating, does it all start to come together and make sense.
And it is hard. So like you mentioned about foods that we need to avoid. So you said that like the trans fats, and I was aware of kind of processed foods to avoid. And obviously I mentioned the shift that I made in terms of sunflower oil to extra virgin olive oil. Are there any other foods that you would recommend somebody with MS or even any autoimmune disease to completely avoid?
Yeah, so it's anything that again goes back to, how do we reduce the inflammation in the body? What are the foods that cause the inflammation? And you mentioned them yourself, actually. So cutting out the dairy and the gluten. And often people say, well, I you know, in terms of gluten, they're like, I'm not celiac, I don't have celiac disease. But you don't have to have celiac disease for it to be inflammatory. We know that there's a sort of a low grade chronic inflammation that may eventually lead to sort of celiac, but at the moment, and you can start to see it. You know, just it's worth sometimes noting that when you're eating these types of foods, how do you feel? You know, do you feel sluggish afterwards? Do you feel like you can't concentrate? You know, do you start to get like skin rashes and things that you know, I don't normally get these? And then that's when you can start to see, actually, these are causing inflammation in my body. It's not being right in my body. So it's often those sorts of foods that it's worth kind of trying to eliminate. Like I said, gluten, dairy. I'd normally say meats as well. Obviously there was a caveat in, obviously some fats are good, but obviously meat will have a lot of saturated fat. And then obviously things like alcohol. So those are kind of the main sort of ingredients to try and cut out.
Yeah, although my neurologist said, if you want some alcohol, then have red wine. And I was like, great, that's brilliant. She gave me permission. So like, red wine, it will be. And actually, I've acquired a taste for it, and it's not that bad. And I think, you know, whenever I do have a social event, it will just be a glass of red wine. And I feel like there are actually some benefits for the heart, you know, a glass of red wine now and again. And so it's just moderation. I've really
exactly, and it has to. I always say that's why I never kind of really promote any really real strict diet. It has to fit in with life. You know, if you're too strict, then it's, you know, it has impacts on, for example, like your social life, and you know, sitting together and eating with the family. There can be that, you know, if you're eating one thing and everybody else eating something, that kind of isolation comes in. So there has to be a balance. And
it's that constant reminder. Like it was very drastic, and I know sometimes I'll advise people to do things slow and steady in order for it to be sustainable. But for me at the start, I needed it to be brutal. And my body needed it to be really brutal. It was almost like ripping the Band-Aid off, because it had to be that drastic in order for it to make a quick change. And actually, I do fully believe that my recovery was quick as it was, simply because we made such drastic diet changes and lifestyle changes from the off. And I feel like from being so drastic at the start, and it almost gave me a head start with my recovery, I've been able to then embed that within every day and be a little bit kinder to myself. So actually, because I am so good, majority of the time. If I have something that maybe isn't as good on my list, it doesn't affect my body as much because it's so minute compared to everything else that's been stored in my body. Whereas before, the balance was probably off, which is why obviously then we've ended up with this flared up autoimmune disease. But actually I feel very strongly that actually my diet changes have really impacted my recovery, and that's why I can sit here very honestly and say that it's something that I would definitely recommend. And if anyone approaches me, I definitely recommend what we follow, like a Mediterranean lifestyle.
No, that's really good. So when you said it was quite extreme at the beginning, did you follow, was it, because there is this autoimmune protocol, I don't know if if that's the diet you followed? Or
Yeah, it was more of I wasn't really a red meat eater anyway, or I think for me it was more like the cakes and the biscuits and all those little treaty things, because I have a very sweet tooth. So it was those changes that made the biggest difference for me. Eating a lot more fish.
Okay.
I liked fish, but I never used to eat it regularly enough. So actually going to having salmon all the time, having your cod or your haddock or your tuna, all those sort of omega-3 infused fishes, having those was quite important and had a main impact. And it was all very much, and it was very boring at the start. It was just a bit of fish and a load of vegetables, but that's what my body needed. And I was able to get through those boring moments of mealtime because I knew that actually the long-term gain that it was going to have on my body. And then we started introducing a bit of fish, and I completely cut out sugar. Mm-hmm. I was a black coffee drinker anyway, so that wasn't a drastic change for me anyway, but actually for some I can appreciate that would be quite harsh. So actually black coffee got me through a lot of my challenging moments. Sure. But sugar, I think getting rid of sugar, and we didn't have a lot of processed meats, but sausages, not having sausages with the kids, not having chicken burgers, those kind of quick meals that sometimes we used to just lean on. I wasn't leaning on anymore because life took a whole direction and actually forced me to take a lot more time and paid more attention to what I was eating. So it felt very drastic because it was fish and vegetables for a very long time. But it was totally worth it.
And what did you notice when you cut it all out? What, all these things, what from a symptom point of view, and how did you feel?
Early days, it was really hard to be able to differentiate if the diet was making any difference because I was still in the heart of my relapse. So everything was being affected. I couldn't walk. I was having constant pain from morning till night. I wasn't sleeping. My speech was really affected. And so actually my recovery from my relapse felt very slow, but I feel like it was actually faster than what it potentially could have been, because now I feel like I'm feeling the benefits, because a year on, my speech is only affected some of the time. Okay. Now my walking is only affected probably out of 7 days. I might need to use my walking stick maybe 2 days. Wow. Whereas at the beginning, I couldn't walk, or I was using it nearly every day. And then it just progressively reduced. So actually, I feel, even though it was a slow and steady sort of recovery, I feel like now I'm feeling the benefits of how harsh things were at the start, because I've managed to then sustain it.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So I think that's pain, hit and miss. I still have to avoid certain foods, and I always will have to avoid certain foods because I've learned the hard way that they cause a flare up, or too much of something causes a flare up.
Yeah.
And it was very instant. So I used to love a Peshwari naan when I used to go for an Indian, and coconut flares up my symptoms. Too much dairy can flare up my symptoms, and I do try and incorporate a little bit in now and again, but not to the point where it's knowing your limits. I've learned how much I can incorporate within my diet and how much I need to just stay away from it. I'll still have soya yogurt for breakfast rather than normal, dairy yogurt. which then will allow me to have some normal chocolate rather than the dairy-free chocolate, because it's that balance, and knowing that actually in order for me to feel like I'm still living and enjoying my meals, I don't want to start having a negative relationship with food either.
Yeah, that's really,
and actually, yeah. And so and it's just understanding my own limits and understanding my own sort of boundaries as to, well, I can have this now because I haven't had it for a few weeks, and just kind of understanding and talking to myself, talking my way through.
Yeah, you're right. It's that approach of, like you say, it's being aware and mindful of what you're doing. So
Yeah,
that self-talk of, say if you're reintroducing something, okay, let's try this and see what happens, and then actually, how is this affecting me? Actually, that did flare up my symptoms. Okay, I might need to, leave that out for a little while again, and then maybe try a little bit again later on if I really want to try that again. So it's that constant, kind of working with yourself. Because, you can't continue to have a very restricted diet. We have to be able to find that balance of where we reintroduce the things that are gonna that we like eating, that actually that maintain our the condition without causing flare-ups, and then that's again something that helps with sustainability of managing this diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I was first diagnosed, I used to really avoid social situations because I'd be scared about going out and being able to have something that I could access on the menu. And so for a really long time, I wasn't leaving the house because I felt like I couldn't go to a restaurant and find something that would meet my dietary requirements. And actually, it's not until I started gaining the confidence to leave, I realized how accessible food is now. If ever there was a time to get an autoimmune disease, now's the time, because actually people are becoming so aware. You can go to a restaurant and get a vegan option or a gluten-free option or a dairy-free option. And I think restaurants are really on board with this kind of journey that individuals are wanting to take, whether they've got an autoimmune disease or not, because I feel like everyone's realizing that if you follow a certain lifestyle, it's just healthier for your body. And I feel like that's definitely the way we're all going to end up going eventually. I've spoken to colleagues and thankfully they don't suffer from autoimmune diseases, but they still follow certain diet plans in order just to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And I think actually they are choosing preventative methods to stop themselves from getting other autoimmune diseases in the future. And I feel like that's really important. But I know, obviously, through research, anti-inflammatory foods that I eat, but I just wondered if there was any particular foods that you felt were really beneficial for inflammation to reduce it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things. I always kind of bring it back to like you say, what's going to help reduce inflammation. So the biggest thing is how we feed the microbiome. So the gut microbiome, the bacteria in the gut, because that's where that's what's going to help us reduce the inflammation. So, like we said, cutting out all the inflammatory foods, the processed foods, anything that causes the inflammation, and it's all to do with that balance of the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. So how do we promote the good bacteria? And there's several different things. So prebiotics, have you heard of prebiotics? So prebiotics is basically fiber. So prebiotics means that it's the fiber element of foods that feed the good bacteria, and the importance of that is it's obviously fiber. Obviously, we don't digest, but it's the gut bacteria that digest them, and they produce these what we call short chain fatty acids that promote the kind of the anti-inflammatory. Sort of they modulate the inflammation within the body. So, and that all comes from this sort of whole food, plant-based sort of diet. So, and like we were saying, like more and more people are also, moving towards more kind of vegan type lifestyle. Not saying that you have to do that fully, but it's where all this kind of good fiber comes from, because there's no fiber in meat, unfortunately. It all comes from it all comes from plant-based diet, and it's the other important thing is having a variety of kind of plant-based foods, and because it's the different types of vegetables and fruits and things like that that have different types of fibers, different types of polyphenols and sort of phytochemicals that the gut bacteria digest and produce different types of preventative short chain fatty acids, which is really important. So it's having a variety of vegetables, a variety of fruits, nuts and seeds, which you talked about earlier, whole grains. So that's all really important to do. The other thing is then probiotics. So we talk about prebiotics, then there's probiotics. Now, probiotics are bacteria species which we can put into the body, and that comes from fermented foods. So things like kimchi, sauerkraut, even types of yogurts, depending on whether you can tolerate them or not. So live yogurts and kefir and stuff like that. And what they do, they have specific species of bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, which obviously they're the good bacteria which are in the gut, and they can help to support sort of the good bacteria in the gut at doing their job and reducing the sort of the inflammation in the gut lining. And then the other aspects are things like making sure we get enough antioxidants, which again, most of the antioxidants come from fruits and berries. It's the pigments in the fruit. So anything that's colourful, so your different coloured vegetables, your different coloured berries, they're all the sort of the antioxidant producing foods. Other things. Another good anti-inflammatory is, and we probably all know about this, is turmeric. And I don't know if that's something that you have in your diet a lot.
Yeah, it's something that's added to dishes. It's something that someone did say, just drink a bit of turmeric in milk and just have it that way. And I was like, I'd rather it just be subtle within my food. And it is literally personal preference, isn't it? But yeah, it's and ginger and garlic, something that I've become very aware of in terms of making sure there's enough in our dishes in order for it to make a difference.
I mean, well, turmeric has the active ingredient is curcumin, but it's better to actually have turmeric as a root rather than as a supplement like curcumin, and it's because of that kind of whole food element. What you're getting from it is not just the curcumin, you're getting the prebiotics, the fibers in the root, you're getting all the other antioxidants that are that part of the actual root itself. So we've known for a long time that turmeric is a very anti-inflammatory food. Vitamin D supplements, so getting out in the sunshine is really important for vitamin D. But
I haven't had much of that this week, but we can try when it's here.
And you also mentioned before the omega-3, so eating the right types of fats, these anti-inflammatory fats, which, like you said, is from your oily fish, but also more importantly is kind of the nuts and the seeds. So like your walnuts, your Brazil nuts, and chia seeds, flax seeds, things like that.
Yeah, no, I think for me, I've become I've almost got like my own little meal plan in my head, so I know what foods in my eyes that I've researched and used from the start that are anti-inflammatory, and I almost stick to those. But I think what's really important is almost retraining your brain and almost keeping up with the research and trying new things, because I feel like your body can get used to, I'll have berries and a bit of granola and my dairy-free yogurt for breakfast. So I'll have that, and then I'll always have something with tuna for lunch, and then we'll either have something with fish or maybe a bit of chicken for dinner. And so there are staple things, and then within that are your vegetables and your fruits and everything else that comes along with it. And we stick, flax seeds is kind of sprinkled on everything that we have as well, because I think it's important to maintain it. But it's so easy just to get I feel like sometimes I'm in a rut because I eat the same things over and over again, and you can almost become a bit bored of it or a bit complacent because you're like, oh, I don't want this again. And so actually by having this conversation, it's almost opening up my own eyes in terms of, well, I can try this and this again, and almost just going back to the drawing board and going back to my anti-inflammatory foods that I, you know, I've got a really long list of things that I pick from.
Sure.
So it's almost like recreating a different meal plan for every week. I think that's been one thing that's allowed it to be sustainable for the family.
Good.
Planning our meals and just and kind of having in our minds, well, these are the foods we're going to have today, this is what we're going to have tomorrow, and just kind of planning it.
That was actually going to be one of my questions, in that what methods have you found useful in adapting your diet, and as you mentioned there.
Yeah, I think definitely being really brutal at the start helped, because it almost was like, well, this is the way it's going to be now. So, and almost getting rid of temptation foods, because if it's not in the house, you can't have it. And which means the kids can't have it either. My husband, nobody can have it because it's not in the house. So actually you choose from what we've got. And that was quite good for me, because if something's there at the start, my willpower wasn't great, and I would go for probably the unhealthy option, because that was just the way my body was kind of conditioned, and my brain was conditioned. But actually then once everything was wiped out, I think that was a really good method for me, was just to start off with this is a clean slate now. This is, you've been given some news, you need to respond to this in order. And my main motivation were my children, you know, in order for the way I was a year ago, for that not to be me for the rest of my life, because I wasn't very useful to anybody back then. So that was a main motivator for me. Meal planning allows it to be sustainable. Just having anti-inflammatory foods in the house, again, that's something, because then I know no matter what we make in the house in terms of recipes, it's going to be beneficial for all of us and our bodies. So that's good. And we cleared out our freezer, having very minimal or zero processed foods. I think sometimes for the children, they like to access certain staple kiddie foods, as we call them. But it means that on those days, my husband and I will eat something different, whereas before we always used to eat the same. Sure. So actually just making those changes. What else has been sustainable actually has been the hard way, is as much as I eliminated everything, when I started introducing things slowly back into my diet, was how my body responded, because I didn't like sometimes how my body reacted to certain foods. So that almost was like it's not even worth it. Don't even try that again. And almost that reality check makes something sustainable.
Yeah.
And at the start, actually, my husband kept a food journal. So foods for what I used to have for breakfast, lunch, dinner, any snacks in between, and how my body was reacting, and what key symptoms I was presenting on that day. And then that carried on for a good few months. And then as we felt like we were on top of it and we knew what foods were suiting my body, then it was just, if I had a flare, it'd be like, right, what have we eaten today? What could a potential trigger be? And kind of eliminating that way. So I think those were the most sustainable ways in which we managed to just maintain this as our lifestyle. And it is a lifestyle. It's not something that's just short and temporary, because actually I know if I stop eating anti-inflammatory foods, I 100% know I will end up relapsing again. And I know the chance of relapsing could still be there, but it's minimal. It's minimized a little bit, and it's minimized through my DMTs, but actually I don't want to be so reliant on medication. I want to be able to have some control myself. Yeah. And actually, if I'm supporting it through lifestyle, then my therapies that I'm undertaking could only make things better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And almost quicken the process, or just allow me to have frequently better days than bad days.
And that's a brilliant way to look at it. And some great tips there as well, especially the food journal. That's a great idea to do.
Yeah.
Have you got any other tips for anybody who you know, who might have an autoimmune condition that you found very useful?
For me, it's listening to my body, and allowing yourself to just to have those days where you feel like you can't manage anymore, and to have that little treat, because I think that's really important. I was very conscious of creating a negative relationship with food, because I didn't want to start detesting it, because it was like, well, I have to eat you because I've got an autoimmune disease sort of thing. And so actually, by allowing myself to have those treats now and again, allow me to just keep that balance and that positive sort of mindset towards food. Definitely, for any tip would be just to clear out any temptation. I think especially in your early days, if you've just been newly diagnosed and you're just trying to figure it out, it would definitely be do your research, because I know myself, I wasn't in the right frame of mind to do the research myself, and I probably would have given up a year ago and just carried on and not had the willpower. So actually allowing people in your circle to take control is really helpful, because the way my husband was thinking, he was very logical and very sort of proactive. I didn't have that capability. So I had to completely entrust that what he was doing for me and what he was telling me was for my benefit. And I think that's definitely something, is trust the people around you a little bit, just to take control, because we don't always think logically when we're going through so much emotionally and physically. And also, yeah, definitely do your own research, and trial and error, I think, is definitely, you've got to try something before you knock it. You know, I never thought I'd enjoy tuna as much as I do, because you then start becoming very experimental with how are the different ways you can make tuna.
Of course.
And I think the more you tell yourself the benefits it's doing for your body, I think the more you're willing to do it.
That's brilliant. Great advice.
They're my top tips.
Absolutely.
But for you then, I obviously feel like I'm aware of foods that I should be eating and kind of foods I need to avoid. But in terms of any specific supplements or anything that you feel like would support my diet, are there anything? I know I take vitamin D tablets, because we can't rely on the sun.
As in supplements are, I always say, as much as possible, it's best to try and get as much as you can from eating the right type of diet. So and it goes back to eating a range of different foods, so that you're getting, you know, the whole mixture of vitamins and nutrients. Obviously, yes, you mentioned vitamin D is often a difficult one to get, because we don't get much sunlight, so supplementing with vitamin D is often, you know, quite important for autoimmune conditions. Omega-3s sometimes as well is one that can be supplemented. Apart from that, I wouldn't say there's any specific or particular ones. It's making sure that we're, like we said, trying to eat the most sort of anti-inflammatory things. So the most anti-inflammatory vitamins are vitamins A, C, and E, which we call ACE, which again you can supplement those, but you know, it's good to try and get them from the right types. So vitamin A comes from anything that's kind of orange or yellow, which is like your apricots and orange carrots, sorry. And then vitamin C, so we know citrus fruits and kiwis, vitamin E, which mainly comes from things like nuts and seeds and things like that. So and you know, things like flax seeds and that. So I always say try and get as much as you can from having that varied diet. But those are the types of things that you can supplement with. Yeah.
No, that's good. I think actually for myself, even though I have a lot of omega-3, I top up my omega-3 with omega-3 sort of tablets every day, just to make sure. I think I've gone so far on the other side where I don't want to relapse. I feel like I'm going a little bit overboard sometimes with okay, so I'm eating all this variety, but I still need a multivitamin, or I'm eating all this variety, I'm still doing omega-3, and just little things like that. I take my vitamin D every day as well. But I think it's just, you're right, it's that balance, isn't it, in kind of making sure that we are getting it through our foods. I suppose it's the most natural way.
Absolutely, yeah. Where you don't actually then have to think about, am I getting enough? Because we're confident that we're eating such a variety that we are getting enough.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And is there any specific lifestyle changes? I know we've discussed kind of diet, but is there anything else that could complement our diet changes that you feel would be beneficial for someone with an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all elements of lifestyle are really important. This is why, sort of my whole sort of health coaching is based around several elements. It's based around the sort of the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, which you can see behind me. And it's all because they're so interconnected with one another.
Yeah.
So in their own kind of in their own aspect, they're really important. So we know that physical activity is really important. One, for obviously physical health, like things like bone health and joint health and things like that, and muscle strength. But also, in terms of helping improve your mood, it helps release the chemicals that actually make you feel good. And then managing stress as well is really important, because what stress does is it causes cortisol levels to rise, which is a highly inflammatory hormone in itself,
right?
Which is again going to add to that inflammatory process. But also it affects, as we know, how stress affects our eating habits. We often then go to eating the wrong types of foods, or comfort eating, all of those sorts of things. So we can see how important all of these elements are to one another. And you made some really good points there about sort of having that good support network around you. So that sort of social connection element, your relationships with people, that's what's really going to help you get through these difficult times where, like you say, you weren't in a place where you could think clearly or logically, but you needed those people around you to help you and support you along the way, and so it's not just you making changes, it's the whole your whole sort of close network who are on this journey with you. So all of these aspects are really important.
Yeah, and it's for me, it's different when you're in-house. Those changes are quite easy. I think I really rely on my support network when I go to my mother-in-law's, or I go to my own parents, because they've had to adapt. So they now, when we go over, will make an anti-inflammatory meal. My mother-in-law, when she's doing Indian cooking, will make a separate batch for me, or she'll use chapati flour that's gluten-free. So she's made those changes in order to support my lifestyle, and my parents have as well. And I think that's really important, because as much as at the start I felt like I was being an absolute pain going over, it's a testament for how much they care for me as well, because they want to help. And I think that's been really important. But it also means that when I do go to different places, I can access what everyone else is eating. It's just slightly adapted. And actually I've opened their eyes a little bit to different foods, and the relationship between food and our body internally. And we just assume that if we eat something just because it's got low calories, that it's actually healthy, and it doesn't always necessarily mean that. And I've become very accustomed to looking at packaging and make sure everything's green at the front. Whereas before I didn't even look at it. If I fancied that, I'd pick it up and put it in the trolley. Whereas now I started spending a long time just looking at the nutritional information, and if it's all green, we're like, oh yeah, great, that's perfect, sort of thing. And just making those little changes, I think, have made a huge impact as well. But almost like parting words, so if you had to do a shopping list for somebody.
Yeah.
What staple foods or ingredients would you recommend somebody with autoimmune disease to always have
Mhm.
in their cupboards or in
Sure.
their fridge?
Okay. It goes back to that. That the ideal scenario is this kind of whole food, plant-based, sort
Okay.
of processed um, diet, and so it's and like you say, it kind of makes you think about when you're doing this, makes you think about, what you eat. So a lot of what kind of my research and things have led me to do is actually change what we eat and what we do as well.
Okay.
So and a lot of it now is based on vegetables. So not vegan or anything, but a lot of it is more plant-based. So it's fresh vegetables, it's varieties of vegetables, all the different colours. If you heard the term of eat the rainbow,
Yeah.
and it's because of all the different pigments within those different coloured foods are the food sources for the gut bacteria, as we were saying, and that's where kind of and the antioxidants, that's where the sort of the anti-inflammatory part come from. So as much as you can, based around a sort of a whole food plant-based diet, which also includes obviously nuts and seeds, because that's where this the omega-3s are coming from, and the plant-based proteins. That's where a lot of that comes from, and obviously the combination of those is giving us all those important fibers that the body needs. If you're trying to reduce or cut out obviously the processed foods and sort of the processed fats, trying to cut down salt as much as possible is important, and having the polyunsaturated oils and things is really important as well. So yeah, those are kind of main ingredients, and like you say, having some oily fish and things like that. So it's more of that kind of Mediterranean based sort of style diet if you're not going to go fully plant based, somewhere in between.
Yeah, no, I think that's I feel like I'm doing something right then. So thank you.
Absolutely, no, you definitely are.
No, thank you for that. I think it's I think you know yourself sometimes if you're doing something right, but I think as humans we like that reassurance that actually what we are doing or what we are following is beneficial. And even though I can feel it internally and people around me can see it visually in terms of my progress, I think when you get some professional advice and some professional guidance, I feel like it just gives you that extra level of comfort and reassurance that actually, keep going, because what you're doing is right for your body.
Absolutely.
How's the family responded to the changes that you've implemented?
Yeah, I think in the same way, like with yourself, I think everybody is kind of responded really well, and we all it's been great, because again it's that whole kind of experimentation of let's try this and let's try that. There's obviously certain things that children don't like, but as long as they've tried it, then that's great, and we'll try something else the next time.
Oh, absolutely. My girls will look at something like, oh, don't want that, mummy, and I'm like, no, we have a one bite rule. You try it and you see, and then if you don't like it, it's fine. You choose whichever vegetables you like on your plate, but you've got to try that first. And it's very much. And I've got one that's a bit more hesitant than the other, and then she almost like motivates the other one, like, come on, then let's just try it, sort of thing. Just get it over and done with almost. Then they'll let us go, sort of thing. So, but yeah, they and I think for myself and my husband, it's preventative for our girls, because we've learned that actually an autoimmune disease can be hereditary and it can be passed down. So it's almost, I've been given this to stop my girls from getting it.
And that's it. You're trying to pass on the things that you're learning now to prevent any these things in the future.
Yeah, and making sure that they've got a really healthy relationship with food as well. I think sometimes children, we all do, don't we? We stick to what we like and we stick to what we know because we're going to enjoy it, or it's within our comfort. And trying to build a relationship for them with food has been our main sort of focus as well for this year, because they've had no choice. It's been a shock for everyone. It's been quite brutal for everyone, and so actually we're all going through this journey together, and that's been quite nice.
Yeah, brilliant.
But no, thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. It's been a really good conversation. It's really great for you to have shared your experiences and your journey. It's been really fascinating to hear about.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
All right then.
Bye.